So the book that I chose for my book talk is Pluto Visits Earth. It is by Steve Metzger and illustrated by Jared Lee. So the book starts out with Pluto getting told that he is no longer a planet anymore by one of the space rocks. And then he's like, what do you mean? And so then the space rock explains that he's classified now as a dwarf planet and not a real planet. So then Pluto gets mad and he's talking to two of his moons and he's like, do you think I'm small? And they're like, well, you're bigger than us. And then Pluto remembers about the little girl that named him, which is Vanita Burney. And so then he decides that he's going to go to Earth and ask why he is no longer a planet. And he is going to try and get some of the planets to come along and help him out. So he goes to Neptune. And Neptune is too busy taking care of his 13 moons. Then he goes to Uranus, and he's too scared. Saturn is too busy looking at her rings. And then Jupiter just calls him a small fry. And then he goes to Mars, and Mars is too busy with the Martians, because it's Mars Day. And then he doesn't even bother going to Venus and Mercury because they're out of his way. So then he goes and sees the two astronomers and asks, why am I not a planet? And they explain to him that he's much smaller than all the other 8 planets. But then a little boy comes and tells him that it doesn't matter if he's not a planet because he is still his favorite. And the little boy tells him that big or small, it doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter the size of Pluto. He's still special. So then Pluto decides to go back to the solar system, now happy with what the little boy told him. And so then he goes back to the solar system, his place in the solar system. And then at the end of the book, there's some information about how Pluto was discovered, the discovery of his other 2 moons that we found, because Pluto has 5. And then it goes into detail about why Pluto is no longer classified as a planet, saying that a planet needs to use its gravity to clear its orbit of any asteroids, which Pluto does not. And for that reason, astronomers reclassify Pluto as a dwarf planet. My favorite page in the book is actually this one where it shows all of the solar system, and I love this little thing that Pluto says back here. Do I look small with all this space around me? I think it's just really cute with, with the book. So 3 main critiques was first the message in the book. Pluto is seeking, validation. He just got told that he's no longer a planet. And so he's going to, argue with the astronomers. And basically the boy says, it doesn't matter how big or small you are, you're still my favorite. So basically he gets the validation from others that he was seeking. And so a lot of people didn't like that message they wish that Pluto would have had a self-realization that he's still important, and instead of trying to get validation from others and confirming that validation from others, that he should have been able to do that for himself and figure out his self-worth and not need it from others. Which I do agree with that critique. I think seeking validation from others is not something that we should be teaching kids to do. And so I would have liked it better if Pluto discovered that it doesn't matter how small he is, he's still, important and stuff, instead of just receiving that from someone else, which he was wanting. Another critique about this book is that there's not a whole bunch of information as far as the planets. It shows some things like clearly Jupiter is bigger than all the other planets, and then, Saturn's rings and everything. And then the fact that Neptune has a whole bunch of moons. But as far as actual information, scientific information, there's not a whole bunch, which I do agree with. This is a fiction book, so there's not a whole bunch of scientific information. It does have little things, but I would have liked to see a little bit more about the individual planets that he's visiting. So I do agree with that one. And then another critique was the inaccurate information that is portrayed in this book. The main one being the Martians that Mars is with. As in there is no living beings in space that we have found, so they didn't like the idea of aliens being in here. But again, it is a fiction book. And then the other thing that people pointed out was that this was a book about Pluto. And he's talking to two of his moons. One is shown in the picture not saying anything, but Pluto actually has 5 moons, and only 3 are depicted here, so where are the other 2? And it's good to note that those other 2, that one of those other 2 is actually the moon is bigger than Pluto. So it would be important for that planet to have a say because he's bigger than the supposed planet. So they didn't like that, this moon didn't say anything, as he's clearly bigger than Pluto. So those were the 3 main critiques. I do agree with some of the inaccuracy in the information, but again, it is a fiction book. So I feel like, a fiction book doesn't need to technically be 100% accurate because then planets can't talk. So I do agree with some of those critiques and certain things about the book, but at the end of the day, it is a fiction book. So 2 of those comments are about that it doesn't have enough reality in it. But again, a fiction is not supposed to be 100% accurate. Or accurate at all. The activity that I was wanting to do with this book was I was going to have kids pick a side on whether they think Pluto should be a planet or that it shouldn't be a planet. And they were going to have a debate and try and convince people from the other side to join their side. So they can give factual information like the book suggests as far as, the moon's bigger than Pluto. Or, it doesn't get rid of the rocks like other planets. But they could also just do things that they feel like as, if Pluto was big enough to be classified as a planet, at one point, why is it no longer big enough or something like that. So I will give students some time to research information about Pluto if they wanted to where they can build up a little bit of their argument. But then they're just going to have a nice little debate about whether they think Pluto should be a planet or not. And then, of course, I would be there as the mediator to facilitate discussion and make sure that anything isn't getting out of hand and no one's getting offended, remembering that this is just a fun activity for them to do. And it fosters creativity. As far as, their opinions about, why Pluto should or should not be considered one of the planets in our solar system.